19 minutes after 7, we're going to talk about this and other things with Chlöe Swarbrick, Green Party co-leader and ACT Deputy Leader Brooke van Velden, who join us live from Parliament this morning. Good morning, Morena. Thanks for being with me.
Atamarie, good morning.
Good morning. All right, let's start with the poll last night. Chloe, you must be pleased to see the Green, you've released your alternative budget. The rest of the country can think what they will, but clearly your supporters, it's resonating with them.
Yeah, look, I mean, you'll always find me on the record saying that people should not just watch the polls, but realise that we are the polls. There is a sense of agency here, and we should never treat them as a self-fulfilling prophecy. So what I far prefer to reflect on is the engagement that we're having with New Zealanders on the ground. And what we're hearing loud and clear is that people want a sense of hope amongst the really bleak prospects that this government has rolled out with these callous cuts across our public services. So we're stoked to be putting on the agenda free GP services, free early childhood education, free dental care, rapidly reducing our climate changing emissions, and of course a fairer tax system which allows us to pay for this.
Brooke, what did you make of the poll? Because the fact that a majority of Kiwis either don't care, don't know, or actually support your pay equity changes.
Well, look, I don't actually want to read too much into any one particular poll. I think we are quite far out still from an election, and I agree. Look, if I wasn't in politics myself, I probably wouldn't be, engaging with every single political issue every single day, like most New Zealanders aren't. But look, I think, the fact that ACT is still, by and large on the same results that we had on election night is not surprising. It's a good thing. We've held up well during our term in government. But I think it's also true that some of the interesting facts that came from the poll last night were, while we might hear a lot of, noise outside Parliament on the pay equity issue, by and large, it was 50-50. There were some people for it, some people against it. I think it's just important that we get some of the facts out there, and the facts got lost in a lot of misinformation from Labour. Perhaps that's why they had a dip. Who knows? Who can predict why these things happen? But pay equity system is still here. Equal pay is still here, and no woman is having their pay cut. And those are just messages I'll just keep reiterating. We actually have a difficult job as a government to balance the budget to make sure we're making the best decisions for all New Zealanders. But this budget is much better for having ACT in it.
I can see you doing your best, Chloe.
If I can just make the point really quickly, Ryan. Yeah, if I can just make the point really quickly. If we're to believe all of those arguments from the government about the idea of sustainability or efficiency or otherwise, and to kind of ignore the fact that they've saved themselves $12 billion by not progressing the pay equity system as it was, all of that stuff should have held up in the space of a select committee where we could have heard from experts in the general public, and potentially some of this accused mis or disinformation could have actually been washed out.
All right, okay, let's very quickly go to this privatisation issue. Chloe, Landcorp, when you look at the numbers in the Herald this morning, so Landcorp has been sent a letter by Simeon Brown. The 5-year average total shareholder return is 2.6% for them. Operating return on equity is 0.4%. NZ Post is bad. Cordia is bad. Why do we own these companies? Why do you want us to own them?
Well, perhaps the question has to be asked, what is the public good offered by the likes of New Zealand Post? If we weren't to have New Zealand Post owned by the New Zealand government, if we were to give it to a private entity, perhaps we'd have even worse closures across the board, and that would be massively impactful for our rural communities, but also anybody who wants to send posts to their friends or their whānau across Christmas or receive that post. So I guess that this conversation needs to be had in that broader context. And again, if we take a second, step back and go, what is it that we're actually trying to achieve as a country? What does it mean to have these things operating in the public good? Then we're having a far more rational and evidence-based conversation, I think.
And Brooke, presumably you would be right behind these letters. In fact, you'd want to move a little faster than National would like.
Should we cutting it all, mate? Oh, absolutely. Look, I really support Simeon Brown and what he's aiming to achieve here. It is important that if the government is to own companies, that they do produce and they are efficient and work well. Otherwise it is just a sunk cost for the taxpayer. ultimately, it is the taxpayer who is then owning these companies. You know, it's been a long-standing ACT Party policy to sell off shares within some of these state-owned enterprises. And what we've seen historically is when the government does this, we actually end up with more productivity and better performing state-owned enterprises. So I highly support what Simeon's here to achieve. These companies, you know, we do have to question why we do own them. New Zealand Post, you know, when was the last time people sent a letter? But it's also important that if we are going to own them, that we actually ask them to perform well, because that's what taxpayers would expect. That's what a shareholder in a private entity would expect.
I just suggest that anybody who's following that line of rationale should look at what happened with the state asset or partial sell-off of our energy sector. We have we have not seen the investment in renewable energy, and in fact we see the entirely predictable energy crisis every single winter where the cost of living goes.
All right, we have to leave it there, guys. Thank you very much, both of you, for coming on the program this morning and dealing with the sound issues that I know you have been dealing with for the last couple of minutes. That's the Greens' Chlöe Swarbrick and Brooke van Velden from ACT.